They're in here somewhere. Oh, there.
This call is now being recorded.
Awesome. All right, let's update the date here and start sharing. Alrighty. This is a interesting way to overlap everything, as is everything. Hold on. I went and changed my font yesterday playing around with my browser, and I think it broke it all. All right, switching browsers. Take two. That looks better. Alrighty, presentation mode. And we're off. So this is the Indy Working Group call. It is May 9th. And this is being recorded, as Nathan said. Nathan, is this being recorded to your cloud or do you know where?
Yes, it's being recorded to the Sovrin Zoom account.
Okay, perfect. Moving forward, we shall continue with our traditional ritual of the reading of the Linux Foundation antitrust policy. Would anybody like to volunteer?
I feel like we need drums when you say the ritual of the reading of the Linux Foundation antitrust policy. There should be a drum beat.
There should.
When you said drum, I thought you were going to say Drummond was volunteered.
Yeah, I read it last. I'm happy to read it. Yeah.
I'm happy to volunteer, but I was referring to a ritualistic tempo. But
I think, Richard, since you brought it up, that you should do the stentorian reading of the policy today.
The Linux Foundation antitrust policy in a galaxy far, far away and long ago. Linux Foundation meetings involve participation by industry competitors, and it is the intention of Linux Foundation to conduct all of its activities in accordance with applicable antitrust and competition laws. It is therefore extremely important that attendees adhere to meeting agendas and be aware of and not participate in any activities that are prohibited under applicable U.S., state, federal, or foreign antitrust and competition laws. Examples of types of actions that are prohibited in Linux Foundation meetings and in connection with Linux Foundation activities are described in the Linux Foundation antitrust policy, available at the URL you can find here. If you have any questions about these matters, please contact your company counsel, or if you're a member of the Linux Foundation, feel free to contact Andrew Updegrove of the firm of Gesmer Updegrove LLP, which provides legal counsel to the Linux Foundation.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
I think we need to propose to the TSC that every working group call does this. Moving forward, we also have the Hyperledger Code of Conduct in here. This is very useful. We like to maintain a constructive community, and one of the things about that is being able to communicate with each other and being able to have some sort of code of conduct. And so if you wish to know the rules, here's the proper link to go check them out. With today's agenda, we're going to do some updates on what's going on in the different working groups. And then we will do a IIW recap. And finally, we'll get to a ID ramp demo, as well as a discussion. They've got some really cool stuff. And if we have some time left over, we'll move to open discussion. Does anybody need to add anything to the agenda? Nope. Okay. Let's do some updates here. The Indy Agents Working Group call. Sam normally gives this. Steven, you want to give it this time?
Yes, we did an IIW recap. We talked about Project Aries, and as of now, the Indy Agent Group weekly call is renamed to and is changed to the Aries Aries working group call. So Indy agent working group call. Rest in peace, long live the king. And then we got into a discussion of whether UUIDs, whether peer DIDs should be UUIDs or not. And that went down several depths of rabbit holes.
Yeah, there's a trailing 2.5 hour conversation if you watch that recording.
Was it 2.5 hours after the end of the meeting?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
We got to a constructive place. As an update on that, Oscar has written up a document with some of his new understandings, and he has just sent that over to me. I need to take a reading. There's some new questions in there, but one of the main things that's going to come from it is we're going to get some PRs into the DID peer method spec, so you clarify some of these further concepts that are more tribal knowledge based. As well as we're still working through a few things specific to what's happening with the uniqueness aspects that's brought in by the UUIDs, as well as considering what happens if we do hashing of the DID doc, which was proposed at IIW, but we can talk more about that. Ken?
You might want to fix the spelling of Aries really quickly on the...
Oh, that's a good point. Sam, Sam or Steven, do you want to cover what's going on with the Aries stuff?
Yeah, one note here, it's Aries like the star constellation, not like the God of War. So always make sure it has the I and the E.
Yeah. ARIES.
Green. I think I talked about it. I mean, we're going to start with that. We've renamed the working group, and we're ready to get. I mean, things will continue somewhat, and then there'll also be a bunch of work done on organizing in particular the Hype repo first, so that it becomes an Aries RFC repo, and working on the rules. That was more in the maintainers call, but working on the rules for how to transition Hypes into RFCs in the new project.
Okay.
So that was the main Aries-specific discussion.
Specifically, the timeline is such that we're going to be having calls and beginning to talk about the standards and then like the test suite in advance of the other more complicated code bits during their extraction process. So there's things to get started with before we actually reorganize all of the code to generalize the ledger-based interfaces.
Gotcha. Relevant to that, there's a DID off call in diff right after this. Do you want to do DID comms the second or the third week?
Second or the third week of the next one? Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think that it depends a little bit on the getting the repo up, but I think that having next week, I think the topic could be a continuation of the credentials exchange spec, and I think the week after that is probably feeling like the right timeline for sort of diving into the ratification process. That gives us some time as well to sort of clean up and make sure that we like the RFC process flow in Aries. We're trying to learn from the proposals that we've had in Indy and start with those rather than needing to fix them again or to improve them. So I think that probably a week and a half or 2 weeks from yesterday is the right time to sort of really dive in and have those calls. But the next call will have a little bit of RFC review and then spend the rest of the time working on the credentials exchange hype.
Okay. I want to keep this moving a little bit. Thank you for the excellent recap, Sam and Steven, on that information. Please come and join us on the Aries call. That is going to have some new, very interesting properties, and we're trying to grow that group right now. That is going to be at the same time as the Indy agent call used to be, which is Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
There was some talk about the Aries call moving to Mondays. Is the Indy maintainers call changes time? Was that?
We decided to move to just replace the agent call rather than go down that path.
So the idea here was that when we do add a maintainers call for Aries, which probably won't happen right away, that maintainers call for the Aries group can happen opposite the maintainers call for the Indy group. and we're going to be moving to alternating meeting times for that Indy maintainers call. So every 2 weeks, we would have 2 meetings on that day. One would be the Indy maintainers call. The other could be the areas maintainer call when the areas group decides they need it.
Okay, gotcha. I didn't think about that, but that makes sense. The Indy Semantics group. Ken, do you want to give a highlight of this, or anybody else?
Yeah, this is the week that we do not meet. We meet every other week. So our next meeting will be on Tuesday the 14th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time.
Gotcha. And then we've got Richard. I see you're the person on here who's been covering the Indy SDK stuff. Do you want to give a discussion about that?
Yeah, the two most important items was we planned the next couple releases. There are a number of pull requests that people want in the next couple releases, so we talked about those and got them scheduled. So we're excited about that. And I forgot the exact number, but we have like 9 repos that for language-specific libraries that all have maintainers. Thank you for those who volunteered. And Nathan's going to create those repos so we can get started on language-specific SDK libraries.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that recap. And next we have Mike Lauder. Do you want to just do URSA and crypto together?
Yeah. Well, so a lot is happening. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
There you go.
So I thought people would be interested in this. If I can find my, there we go. So a couple of things. First off, Brent and I are almost done with this paper. This is the AnonCreds 2.0. We tried to make it as business friendly as possible. The only thing really left to add in here is the math, but this should be super digestible and explain what is involved and how it will work. I can send out a preliminary if you want, but I'd rather just wait till we're done. It's basically just the math behind everything and a very digestible explanation of everything, including auth-z, which allows you to disable agents from proving, or maybe even other permission-based things that we decide to add to the ledger, and how it all works. So that should be done hopefully within another week. The second thing is I've mentioned this in the past about how we're going to be using hash functions that should speed up bulletproofs and snarks. Those hash functions have now been officially blessed by the crypto community. Here's the paper if you're interested in it, but they're called Starcat and Poseidon. And this is the paper that shows how they're, it's done this thorough analysis. And then the third paper, let's see if I can find it. There we go. Close that. Here's the paper that covers, it's now been released for basically doing multi-issuer issued credentials. So if you wanted to say, I want 3 out of 5 issuers to sign this credential, we have basically blessed math for it now. So you could decentralize the issuers. So I don't trust one issuer by himself, but if 3 out of 5 do it, then my credential is still good. Or then I get a credential instead of just one issuer. So that's where that's going. And I've just finished implementations for the new credential signature. I have not done this one yet. And then I'm moving on to the proof stuff, which will now use these new hash functions. And Lavesh did a preliminary implementation of the Poseidon hash function with snarks and using Zcash. Zcash has like some benchmark tests that they use. So if you just substitute the Poseidon hash into Zcash, it runs 7 times faster. So anyway, and we're not doing that exactly, but we should be doing things that are a little simpler, which means we might get a little better improvement. So probably between 7 to 14 is what Dimitri predicts. So good stuff. So I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it back to you. So that's where we're at with Sovrin Crypto and and URSA. Oh,
Awesome.
never mind. One more thing.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead.
Thanks to John Geeter, he has come up with how Sovrin can solve the HSM TEE key management problem. This is what he sent me just this morning about how to fix it. Basically what this means is if when we put this in URSA and integrate it with Sovrin as a separate thing, that Sovrin can now make it so we don't have the centralization problem with remote key attestations, which will be really cool.
Can you explain a little higher level what that means? Like,
sure. So, for example, Intel can only issue key attestations for Intel's chips. Let's say I wanted to spin up my own secure environment and say this key is designated only for signing British Columbia, business licenses, and it's in the TEE. Well, they can't do that under the current model. There's no way to say that this key is restricted for that purpose and then to attest to it. So,
gotcha. Okay, so
we
it's
would now be able to do that, which would be really cool.
Gotcha. Yeah, that actually will be really useful in terms of using credentials for software management, I believe, is where this will go for use case.
Yeah. So you can create your own custom HSMs and TEs without relying on these expensive hardware vendors. But that also means some of the hardware vendors that don't want to play nicely in this area will now be forced to, because there's a lot of the smaller players that have been looking to take them down. And not that we're directly trying to, but now there's a means to.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's going to be very interesting to see kind of how this this integrates with software development going forward. Thanks for sharing that, Mike. Something particularly relevant to the IAW discussion as well is that I believe that we're going to need an implementation of XChaCha 20 Poly 1305 IETF key wrapping algorithm. So I wanted to talk more about that later to see if the crypto group can help us get that implemented, because I cannot find one that has been designed other than like a preliminary one that Dimitri designed like 4 years ago. So
key wrapping, well, that's just a non or auth crypt.
No, it's like
Are you
wrapping in the sense of like you don't need a nonce to be able to perform it. I'll talk more about it because I figure it's not as relevant to this group. And so, wrong browser. Stop sharing, and then where's Zoom at? There we go. Here we go. Back on track. So jumping forward, that's a perfect lead into the IAW discussion. We've had quite a few people who attended IAW. Does anybody want to give a recap? If not, I kind of wanted to start calling on people because I know there's some great informed opinions on here.
I can give a short recap of the compatibility stuff that we talked about.
Perfect. You're going to be the first one I called on.
Perfect. So I'll be relatively brief here. We went into this a little bit more in depth in the Indy agent call, as it's pretty relevant there. We talked, had conversations with a bunch of groups. This includes Uport, Jolacom, Civic, and Diff, like Microsoft Diff Hub folks as well. One of the developers from Microsoft that works on Diff Hub was at those conversations, and we talked about sort of broadly approaching things, and we kind of overviewed it. We talked about common crypto approaches based on Kyle's stuff. We talked about message typing. We talked about like protocol approaches. We began discussions of the Diff Hub's actions interface and how it relates to protocols, and those conversations are actively ongoing with various members of the community. So that's good. There's lots of good productive work there, but we're hoping that we can carry the momentum of those conversations into further ones as we sort of ratify some of the Indy hypes into Aries RFCs. And so that we think that's going to be a good opportunity for that. But it's very productive to have those conversations, and I feel like we made a lot of progress in the broader community.
I do as well. It's one of those things where getting a face-to-face meeting showed to have quite a bit of progress in terms of interoperability, particularly around many different areas where we've kind of just not been able to get the time to sit down and figure out the differences as well as work through solutions. So IOW had quite a bit of conversation that followed that similar pattern. And I'm sure there's others who would like to provide recaps.
I don't see Daniel Hardman on the call. Is he here?
I'm not seeing him either.
I don't
talk about the peer did stuff.
Yeah, in his absence, he's more qualified there. But in his absence, he led a session on peer did things, and that was not only well received, but there were some similar ideas fronted by the Uport folks based on how they do things in Ethereum, or how they could do things in Ethereum, and there was pretty broad acceptance of that topic, which was really encouraging.
We also had some other interesting conversations that he's looking to recruit some people on right now. He messaged the CCG on it. He started going into a linked secret explanation discussion with Reuven about ZKPs, which led to a discussion about handling fraud with credentials. And so he's looking to set up a meeting for that. So if you're on the CCG, that's a great call to join. There's not been a time decided at this point, I don't believe. But he's looking to recruit people, and I've seen that a few people have already started to respond and suggest joining. So the idea behind it is essentially we're trying to figure out how can we highlight the different aspects of fraud that can be committed with credentials today. Is there a way to reduce those amounts of fraud and at least make sure that they're as good as, if not better than, current things today? So if you would like to do that, feel free to reach out on the CCG mailing list, or reach out to Daniel Hardman on Rocket Chat to let him know that you like to join, and he will give you more information about that. Do we have anybody else? I know there's tons of good discussion. I don't want to call on people, but I know there's.
So
I'll jump in. This is Thomas. There was quite a bit of discussion around a get did method that would allow developers to use DIDs to sign the work in open source repositories and potentially improve the governance around some of the projects with the Linux Foundation specifically. So there's a lot of work there, and some work actually being done on getting that put into the DID registry.
Dave Hughesby, thanks Thomas for bringing that up. Dave Hughesby is the one around that work. So if you are interested in helping or understanding what's going on there, then Dave Hughesby is the Hyperledger security maven. So he headed up that.
And Hyperledger sponsored a bunch of interns. One of the interns is asked to do that project. I've been working with that intern who's also working with Dave Hughesby. So we got a whole group that wants to get this built in the next couple of months. We'll see how it goes. Yeah,
there was tremendous interest in that. It wasn't lost on anyone the kind of effect that that method would have on, developer awareness of DIDs, and then, moving up into the rest of the stack. And Brian Bellendorf, I've since had a chat with him, and he thinks that that it's a great idea for the Linux Foundation to embrace it and work it into everything that they're doing. So I think it's an incredibly good adoption virus.
There's actually some parallels between the get stuff, the get did method, and peer dids, as in peer dids are only resolvable within a context of a relationship, and get dids are typically only resolved within the context of a Git repository. So it actually strengthens the argument for these sorts of things, and I think will motivate them to be more broadly accepted, which is helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Can someone post does anyone have the link handy and put it in chat? I can't find the link to it.
I've
The
got
link to the Git signing project.
The Git did spec is what I was particularly looking for. What was created last week?
Thomas,
So I put in a chat. It's Dave Hughesby's personal GitHub.
yeah, that's where it's
Yeah,
being
that's the
created.
one.
That's it.
And
Thank you.
also in chat, I put his reference implementation that he's been playing with for the past 8 months or so.
So to be clear, there's two parts of his project. One is how you could use any DID and the keys associated with it to sign a commit, and that's what he's been working for with a long time. The rapid development at IW was having a method for containing DID documents inside the repository itself, which is the get DID method. So there's the signing commits with DIDs and DIDs and keys, and then there's the having the DID actually be in the repository itself. They're related but mildly orthogonal.
Awesome. That was an excellent recap of that stuff. I know he's been working on that for quite some time now. I've talked with him about this a few times now when we've ended up at similar conferences. So it was good to get to see that stuff actually getting built, and I know he was excited to be able to see such a great response at IIW. To start working on the method spec. And so if you'd like to help contribute to that and potentially help contribute to the actual Git library itself, this is a great way to help support that adoption and get DIDs inside of Git. Is there any other recaps that people had at IIW? I know there's plenty more people on here who attended.
This is Drummond. I just wanted to say that the level of DID discussion there and DID document, and just it's feeling like that technology is maturing, quite rapidly and quite nicely. It's sort of taken as a given in like 80% of the discussions that I was part of. So I think that was really good. The other thing is, verifiable credentials are also taken as a given, but the challenges with interop are not yet receiving the attention that they're going to receive soon enough. There are 3 entirely different formats and signature types that are going to be in the candidate CR, and I'm just pointing out to everyone, it's not going to be pretty when those actually start to hit the market.
Part of the relevant discussion to this indie community is that it became clear at IW that most of the indie community that does not, or most of the broader SSI community does not understand that zero knowledge proofs can actually reveal knowledge, meaning they assume that you can prove your age without actually revealing it, and they don't understand there's actually a spectrum of application there. And so I've had some conversations, and I know that Nathan and George and Mike Lauder are paying attention to that and will be working to rectify that misunderstanding.
Is there anybody else here that would like to provide a recap?
I'd like to talk about a couple of things.
Perfect.
There were a couple of sessions that were not as well attended that I think had some interesting insights that are worth mentioning. Matthew Hailstone, who we all know has been working on the system for quite some time with BYU, had a really good session about policy and about how authorization occurs in the system. And we did and Eve Mailer was in attendance there, and we did some good comparisons with other policy engine systems that are out on the market and how those policy type systems fit into enterprise agents and into consumer agents. There's going to be some interesting things to start building around when we grant access to message families and when we don't. And it was good to get a bit of a head start on some of the thinking there, and I'm hoping that the notes for that session provide some insights. We also had a really good session with someone who was very interested in ontology and taxonomies and how those relate to how the sovereign governance framework is constructed. And in some ways, those types of sessions can be really painful because you end up feeling like you talk a lot at the meta level. But it brought back a lot of discussions we've had in the past around how to create convergence on schemas that have more value, so that credentials can become more interoperable across the marketplace. And that's something that we set aside as an idea some time ago because we needed to build the base infrastructure for agents. But it's important to note that as we have this agent infrastructure coming online and we start exchanging credentials, looking towards interoperability between those credentials, that figuring out how to drive people towards credentials that are more interoperable or reuse common schemas, and how to figure out how to search and discover for webs of trust is so important to the next round of objects that we'll want to start putting on the ledger around anchoring governance frameworks so that we can search for and discover issuers that are trusted under a particular set of rules or a particular set of governance. So those two sessions might be things people are interested in looking at in terms of notes, but there's a lot of new development work to happen there as we get through the basic infrastructure.
Yeah, I strongly agree with everything that Nathan was just talking about. In the very last session, Scott Perry and I did a session on governance frameworks because no one had brought up the topic in any other session so far. But when you see the stack we're developing and you finally hit that problem space that Nathan was just talking about, it starts to become really obvious the problems that they solve. So I think we are working our way up the stack to where that piece will fit in nicely.
Hey, this is Nader. I just wanted to echo a couple things and what Nathan said about the ontologies session. I think I attended that one and I found it really helpful, and something actually clicked for me in terms of thinking about how we build up organic kind of trust frameworks based on pairwise interactions, and how important that pairwise context is, and how we sort of need to prioritize that more than shared context, and how that sort of filters up. I don't think I had these concepts fully kind of connect until we were there and Nathan was there and we were kind of discussing it. In addition, I work on the universal resolver, and so from the DID side, I'll say like Drummond said, that DIDs were everywhere, and it was really cool to see just how broadly adopted they're becoming. And then new DID methods like DID get and DID peer, I think are pushing the boundaries a bit in a really exciting way. So Marcus was not at IIW, but I had a chance to speak with him after, and we got to discussing, is there a way that, it would be fantastic if we could somehow pass in like a specific context to the resolver in order to get it to be able to extend to things like did get and did peer, which are globally unique, but not necessarily globally resolvable. So to have these be, as DIDs are evolving, that seems like there's going to be at least these two DID methods and maybe more function in a way that's more, that's less ledger based and more based on communal consensus. So how do we enable the resolver to be able to handle queries like that if we were able to somehow pass in a specific context? So I'd just say that on the DID side, that's really exciting stuff. And then finally, just as far as agents go, I was really happy to, as someone who's involved in Indy and then in Diff and kind of some other spaces like CCG, I just thought it was really exciting to see how all these like Indy concepts that have been incubated within Indy for a long time have started to expand and really get feedback and actually some consensus around these topics. So like callbacks and message types and routing, I was just enlightened to after being somewhat involved in those discussions, but then kind of having one foot out to see how the community reacted to that much more broadly. And I think it's a really positive step forward.
That is an excellent recap, Nader. Thank you very much. And I agree with the sentiment that you bring up about how much some of the Indy concepts that we've been incubating on the Indy agent call and in this call somewhat as well have started to leak out into the broader community and are starting to gain consensus, as well as feedback and questions about where we haven't necessarily considered certain things, where we've considered things very well, and things of that nature. So, it's very interesting to be able to actually put some of our ideas out to the broader community and see what they thought. One of the funniest was the routing discussion, where we explained it, and everyone seemed very confused by it because we started talking about every single possible network topology rather than this is enabled by these two simple changes to your DID doc. So that was a very interesting discussion, and I think we learned a lot about how to explain it, and as well as how we need to start thinking about routing in a particular use case. And so that was a very interesting discussion to be a part of. Do we have anybody else who'd like to provide recaps? I'm looking at the list here. I think we've started to get just about everybody who's attended from what I can tell. I will give a brief, awkward pause, and then we will go ahead and move forward.
You do those brief, awkward pauses so well, Kyle.
I was thinking we should name the length of an awkward pause in terms of a Nathan. So it's like a half Nathan awkward pause or a full Nathan awkward pause. What do you think?
It takes a long time to find mute buttons. You have to give it plenty of time.
This is going to be like an eighth of a Nathan.
Hey, that's a very short one. Okay.
Alrighty. As I said, it's an eighth of a Nathan. We are going to go ahead and move forward. If you think of something along the way after this demo, it looks like we will have a bit of time for some open discussion here. We will see, though. With that, we're going to jump forward to the ID ramp demo, which is some really cool stuff that was showed off at IIW. And I'd like to turn the screen over to them. I assume you guys are going to need some sharing.
We are. Thank you very much for that. I'm excited to kind of go through stuff again. My recap from IIW is being still kind of a rookie. This is my second one, but just amazing content. You just kind of wish you could clone yourself to try and catch more. Steve Pilling's on the call with me as well. He was out there, and it was his first comment was my first comment from last fall. It's like I feel like I'm missing so much. You feel like you're getting a lot of information, but you're still missing it. So just great content. We're excited to be here and kind of go through what we're working on. So with that, I'm going to try to share and see what happens. So if I share desktop one, this should be, I put together just a few quick slides because I wanted to be able to show what we're doing and explain ID ramp. So I'm going to spend just a few seconds at a very high level. ID ramp, the platform of ID ramp is really designed to be vendor agnostic identity aggregation and integration. So we can take disparate identity stacks, put them together, orchestrate policy across them, things like compliance, entitlement engines, and business intelligence to do analytics and monitoring. So our typical customer would be the enterprise that maybe has either through merger and acquisition or just through growth. They end up with multiple different identity silos and they need to deliver services across those. What we're going to see today is our Passport product, which we developed and integrated into the ID ramp stack to provide an SSI integration. And so it's really open integration. Anyone that has the ID ramp infrastructure platform can use this SSI to integrate seamlessly into their IDP infrastructure and their service delivery infrastructure. And that's what we're going to see today. Specifically, we're going to see the bridge product, which integrates into existing IAM services, and we're going to see the services app to show you kind of how a consumable service can be integrated, And then we're going to show our wallet because that's where all of our credentials are stored. So with that, I will see if I can back up a few slides here. Here's what we're going to see today. So I'm going to log into Slack using a credential that's stored in the Passport wallet. That's going to present the credential to the Slack service, which is going to be validated then on the ledger, and I'm going to be granted access to Slack. So important distinction, which we'll see here, is that we're not going to come back to the IAM stack to do this. We're not coming back through that funnel and that centralized service. We're doing this all distributed through an issued credential. So before we get to that, let's back up and talk about how we get that credential issued. So there's going to be some process. What happens typically is there's some process. There's a link to this credential issuance system that I'm going to show here, and that allows for authentication via some traditional IAM process today. So in the enterprise, they'll take this credential issuance engine and they'll tie up SSO, configure it to the existing IAM. In this case, what we're going to see today is Azure Active Directory, and you'll see that as I flow through the demo. What that does then is it presents a list of available credentials based on policy. Hey, this is Mike, he's in the US, he's a member of this group, whatever. All the metadata that exists about me in that Active Directory system can be used to build policy. That's really the ID ramp magic that we've been working on for years, to build a policy of what credentials I should be allowed to use. And these will look like, today, what you're going to see, these look like services. So these will be Slack, Rocket Chat, Fresh Service, those types of things. But that can be any credential, right? It could be a member of the power user group or human resources or whatever you want it to be. Those credentials are completely flexible, and the platform will support that. And then we're going to issue that to the wallet. So to present to challenge as we get there. At any time, please stop me if there's any questions. I'm just going to keep rolling, but if you have any questions at all, stop me and we'll go through them. So now let me fire up and I'll switch pages here. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to make sure this follows. You should be seeing the Google screen now. It looks like it did.
Yep.
And I'm going to fire up my air server so we can see what's going on the mobile side. Drag that over there. Okay, great. All right, so everybody good on that? We see Google, we see the mobile, which just disconnected. Great.
Yes.
Hopefully that doesn't continue to happen. All right, so the first thing we want to do is look at that credential issuance. So I'm going to go to the bridge product that we talked about. So I'm going to go to Passport Bridge. You can see the first thing that it does is it takes me to Azure Active Directory. So now I'm going to authenticate into my corporate Azure Active Directory system. And when I do that, then it's going to redirect me back into the bridge application. It's going to say, hey, Mike, welcome, and here are the credentials that you have available to you. And I can store these on my device. In this demo, we've drawn these out. So you have 3 different QRs. In the wild, this is actually just one. We just generated a single QR that loads all those credentials into your wallet. So it's real simple to use. We'll go through some of the admin stuff, quickly, but it really is just, this is all the magic, right? These are all the unique things about those credentials. We can obviously do self-revocation or management of those. Probably a little heavy for the average user, but this crowd will certainly appreciate it. So those are the issued credentials that we have, and we can do schema definition. This is because I'm an admin user, so we can see the different credentials and schemas and all of that good stuff. But end user screen, this is what the end user is presented with. They load these, and we'll see that reflected in the wallet. So now I'm going to fire up the ID Ramp app. Fingerprint, unlock everything. Okay, got that. So now we're live screen here. I'm going to switch over to Slack. I'm going to sign into Slack, and my connection busted again. Let me see if I can fire that up one more time. Their server's having issues with my connection right now for some reason. Probably because I'm trying to demo something, not the way it works. All right, so I'm going to sign in with Slack. Now, the important thing to see here is this is just this is just a typical Slack login, right? So there's nothing we've done to the Slack application itself other than configure it for single sign-on and point it to this SP, the Passport SP application. So when this comes back, I'm logged into Slack. So that's really a pretty quick and painless process for an end user. They click login. Instead of doing username and password, they hit it with a wallet. It presents that credential and goes. So the screen that I switched over to here is just the credential. These are the different credentials that I have in the wallet, so that you can see, you know, this Slack credential basically is the one that was just presented to the Slack application to log me in. So pretty quick, painless, and available for any of those services that were listed, because those are the credentials that are stored on my device. So any questions there before I step into kind of the service provider configuration that controls all of this?
Just kind of a high-level architecture view. So Slack allows you to add a custom authenticator in there?
Slack allows for it's just a traditional SSO. So if we,
I see.
Yep. So this is basically, you can do an email password login, or you can log in with SSO. We have the bridge application that you're going to see here, the SP service provider application, is basically a bridge between traditional SSO, like SAML or whatever the case might be, and the Indy framework, right, the ledger. So when I presented that credential, I'm presenting it to Passport, but Passport is deferring its authentication, right? So it's just saying, hey, I don't know how to log you in, so go here, and that is picked up then by the service provider application, which will here's the service. So here's the NIST configuration that we were just going through. If we look at it, here's all the endpoint information that we need to figure and available schemas that are accepted. So yeah, so great question. And if we look at the field mapping for this, right, this is really where we can define the definition within the credential and how to map those fields through to the service. So we're going to take and so by mixing these and adding in different schemas, we can basically create what I like to call kind of our multi-factor scenario, right? Where you can say, in order to use Slack, you need to have that Slack credential that we showed in the IDP page here. You have to have that Slack credential, but we could also create a credential for super users, or, you know, really secret service credential, whatever. And then you could require that definition in here to basically pull out multiple credentials and provide a lot tighter security around each of these services, or any of these services independently. So again, for these 4 configured services, right, they all require different elements, and they'll pass different field elements through to the service. For example, this fresh service, we're only passing an email address, and that's going to map to a name ID field in the credential. So that defines what information is going into the service and being exposed ultimately as well. So,
okay, so you're issuing the credentials based on this.
Correct.
Okay.
Issuing the credentials based on this. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So the credentials are being stored in ID ramp on behalf of the user. Is that correct?
Steve, you might have to jump in and help me there, but the credentials are the credentials actually stored on ID ramp in the bridge application, or are they just stored in the mobile wallet?
No, the credentials stored just in the mobile wallet. What happens is when the user logs in through their corporate IDP, we get the user's attributes from the IDP and use that to assemble the credential and send it to the phone.
Okay. Cool.
Hey, Mike, this is John from BC. That looks pretty awesome. We need one of those. This is how we would retire Mr. Login. I want to retire.
He actually used the term Mr. Login.
Mr. Login is going to be retired. Time for him to pay his retirement years after 40 years of messing us up with a man-in-the-middle attack by design. So this is kind of like a transition from password to credential.
Exactly.
Yeah, I call it proof-based authentication is what I would call it.
Yeah, but does Mr. Logan have a good pension plan? Have we talked about that?
No, like they have to be responsible for their own savings, right? So we can't worry about Mr. Logan's future.
Is he in the wrong country?
If he's Canadian, he'll have at least basic like subsistence living in in the forest or something.
Good. Okay. As long as the Canadians will take care of him, we can retire him.
Anyways, this looks pretty neat. So, is this where is this? This is a product service that you're going to offer, or I didn't catch the sort of beginning piece.
Correct. Yeah, we're just, and this is, we started this after fall IAW. I went to fall IAW, and man, I went from mildly interested to full on drinking the Kool-Aid, and we came back and laid this out to the team here, and we decided this was a way to, our goal really here is this is a zero forklift option for the enterprise to get their arms around distributed credentials, right? All they have to do is, configure IDP integration, which is easy. They do it 100 times a day. And configure the service provider integration, which is easy. They do it 100 times a day. And wire those two together, and through the ID ramp policy, they can control how they want to deliver this. And the really cool thing about this, guys, is that I mean, this is what I'm really excited about this more than anything else, because I've been in the enterprise space so long, I kind of know where their pain points are. But distributed credentials and killing the password, obviously that's a super sexy thing and everybody loves it. But the distributed authentication has a lot of weight, right? We work with enterprises, these mammoth enterprises that scale. They're continually scaling and managing their IDP stack with the ebbs and flows, right? With the peaks and valleys that come with 9 o'clock Eastern time, spike because they're still online, they're still authenticating to things, and then East Coast comes online, and you got the early risers in Central. So there's always this massive spike in the mornings, and that's because the traditional IAM stack is a little antiquated in the way that it works. Everything is home running all the time. Anytime I want to log into a service, I got to go back home to check whether I can or not by entering a username and password and coming back. So the thing that excites me the most about what we're doing here is we're not only distributing the credentials, killing the password. Yes, should have done it 10 years ago. Thank God we can do it today. We're distributing that authentication and moving it a long way from the jugular. So now these applications, by the way, the application that you're seeing on your screen here and the service provider and the identity provider application, we have by design configured independently. So they can be deployed independently in AWS or Azure and run independent from one another. So the service provider application can be put in its own web app pool and set to auto scale and whatever. And it'll handle the spikes from these service authentications as they come in the mornings. And it leaves the IDP completely unaffected. And the IDP can now be further hidden from view, right? There's no reason the IDP needs to sit out on the public internet anymore if we just issue the credentials and write those to the mobile device. So there's a ton of security, I mean, real legitimate security advantages to doing it this way. And it's there's some performance and actual financial savings as well from distributing it. So where we're at right now with it, yes, it is a product where it's running. Now we're using it for our own services. We got it in front of our Slack and Rocket Chat services, as well as help desk. And we are integrating it into our ID ramp interface. I'm just switching the screen on you, but basically this is the core ID ramp interface that supports, you know, all of your different identity providers and your application stack to be configured, because there's a lot of really cool enterprise features in here, you know, for that fresh service I was talking about. Here's this particular service. It's tied to Google Consumer IDP. It's also tied to the VCIA Azure Active Directory. I can see all my field maps. I can do consents, right? So that app, if I go to that fresh service app and launch it, for example, it's going to take me into fresh service. So I just SSO'd into fresh service. But if I go back and do something like this, and I'm kind of off script now, so forgive my indulgence here, but go back and configure this, go to that Azure Active Directory consent. Let's say I want to add a new consent that's territory specific. I can do a test, call this test for everyone, save it. So now only users from this Azure Active Directory are going to be presented with a consent that says test. I just happen to be in that. So now if I go back to my app and launch that, it's going to stop me and say, hey, before you can continue into the service, you have to accept this terms and conditions, deal. So these are the types of things that IDRAMP does. So we're really, really interested and excited about integrating the technology that we just demoed here into that type of business policy engine for the enterprise, and being able to deliver it as a really tight package to move the enterprise forward.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
So this is kind of a bit in the weeds, but it's of interest to me related to revocation. What do you think your customers want if they're using credentials for login? What do you think their time window is for revocation? Like, how fresh do you think they want revocation checking to be on a login?
That's a great question. I think they want it to be immediate because that's what they would have today if they removed that user from Active Directory. Yeah. And so we have, and that's why our integration into IDRAMP is so critical, because IDRAMP has the ability through our rules, and there's a lot of garbage in the system. I apologize, but this system has the ability to create rules per IDP for what you want to do. So this is a real time. I can create a rule if I would like to filter or restrict or whatever some user service. We're moving this into the credential area as well. So that's what Steve's working on right now, actually, is how to do that. And update rules and say this user group or this group of users doesn't have access, we have to immediately trigger that revocation.
Yeah. So, Mike, that's something for you to keep in mind as you go through the revocations. There really are very real, and this could be the number one use case these get used, is if we truly are eliminating login and using credentials for that essentially near real-time revocation becomes pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we believe so.
Sorry, that Mike was Mike Lauder. Sorry about that.
Sure.
I was thinking about what Mike Lauder's doing with URSA and the new revocation mechanisms. That's very interesting. Basically, it requires a ledger trip just for that. That's really the only thing you'd need a ledger trip for, is freshness of the revocation.
Right. Well, and if you have a state proof, then you don't.
Meaning
if your service could just say pull the ledger every minute or so, as long as you're willing to tolerate a minute, then you could just use a state proof to validate it immediately.
Oh, I see.
The ledger.
So it's independent of the specific query you're doing. You're just getting the state of the revocation registry periodically as closely as you want, and then each request in between each query can use that state.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, cool.
I mean, that's what I would do for performance reasons. So your logins will be nice as fast as the crypto can go, and you don't have the network latency.
Super interesting.
Yeah. So I'm excited to hear your feedback and where we're at with it right now. We do encourage. I mean, we want this to be successful, obviously, and we need to put it in the hands of people that can really help us not only make the product better, but also uncover the problems and potential pitfalls and things like that we're running into. So if anyone on this call is interested in setting up some kind of a demo or a POC of sorts or whatever, we're more than happy to just work with you and get this thing out in the wild so that it can actually actually determine, what we're going to face when we go into the enterprises. I mean, we're going to take ID ramp is used in some really, really large organizations, as you can imagine, by the nature of the product. And so it's no small task going in and taking this type of a solution into an organization with a user base of 100,000 plus users, right? There's a lot of heavy lifting that's going to happen here. And we've got a lot more under the hood, for the revocation, things that we've been thinking of. I love that idea. I'm anxious to see what Steve's take on it is and the rest of the team. But really like that idea. Anything we can do to save that, save that revocation process is something that's always been in the back of our mind, And so yeah, great feedback, and we're really excited and happy to work with literally anybody to just try to put this out there and really kick the tires.
Hey, Mike, so we are about 2 minutes over. It looks like you just finished your demo as well. Would you mind posting in like one of the Hyperledger Indy Rocket chats so that people are familiar with your Rocket Chat handle and connect with you going forward?
Certainly. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, so that is the ID ramp demo. I was really excited to see that. I know Nathan's got some ideas about how he can use that inside of Sovrin. I'll let him announce that when he wants, but there are some really interesting things that are going forward with this. And, with that, we will kick it over to Rocket Chat as we do each week and let the discussions continue there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle.
Look forward to seeing the recording getting posted. That's going to be fun to review.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Nudge, Nathan.
Hey, thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.